This is going to be your first and my first training video. If you remember a few years back, I was partnering with some people and I had been working through creating essentially what has become this talent acquisition playbook. And it is largely based on my experience as a recruiter and how not only I was shown, but how I eventually learned how to build an entire TA process for an organization that I ran for a few years. Pat myself in the back, got a lot of good feedback on it, not just from my teammates and, executives and whoever, but candidates. I got a lot of feedback from candidates that, whether they got the job or not, they enjoyed the process. So I want to teach you my way of doing things. I'm not saying it's the right way, especially if you're someone who is just starting out as a hiring manager or a decision maker somewhere in the interview process. I think this could be really helpful. And maybe even if you're like a vet and maybe your process is maybe flown a little too close to the sun and you're struggling in certain areas within that candidate cycle or that hiring cycle, maybe there's something in here for you. So this will be in 3 parts. The first one being this one here, partnering with recruiting and HR. And this is really just a walkthrough of some of the behind the scenes you may or may not be engaged in, depending on your operating procedure on opening a role, writing a job description, and then we've kind of thrown in some examples, a job description example, which I'll have, plugged throughout the video. And I'll also have some of the little legal things you should look out for. I think that's super important. So with that being said, we're going to get started. Your general roadmap is identifying the role, the prep work that goes into it, the actual recruiting and interviewing aspect of it, and then the hiring aspect of it. When I first started recruiting, a practice and philosophy that was shared with me by a successful VP at the startup that I had been solely recruiting at is if a manager has an open role in their team, then hiring becomes their number one priority. When you're preparing for a role, there's a lot you need to know in order to set everything up for success. A lot of patience is required to make sure as much of your hiring goes as smooth as it can be. And you want to make sure that it's not just smooth, obviously, for the candidate. And I think we get kind of stuck on that. You want it to be smooth behind the scenes, too, because that chaos does bleed into your conversations with candidates and, of course, with each other when you're trying to make decisions on who should or should not be a part of not just your team, but the entire organization. All these things play a role. So you want to make sure that you're really kind of honed in on these things as soon as possible in the beginning of the process. So that way, as you're navigating and interviewing and debriefing and making decisions, that again, you're not just hiring for the sake of hiring, but you've done it as strategically as possible within whatever limitations and parameters provided you. One of the first things I think you should do as a hiring manager is be aware of your current team's dynamic and the alignment or the lack thereof with not just those dynamics, but the business objectives as a whole. How do you craft a job description and, who's representing you in that interview process? Who's on your team? And we will cover these things. Is the new hire complementing current skills within that team, or is it filling a skill gap? Is the role a sprint where maybe this is really important, but like after this project is done, is there going to be anything for this person to stick around for? Maybe you should consider hiring a contractor versus hiring a full-time person. Those two things impact a lot. Time to fill, how you source for your candidate, how you interview candidates for these roles, your interview process in itself, and if what your team is building, selling, marketing, whatever, is going to significantly impact the organization's success in a positive way through, the skills required, and of course, most importantly, to both your organization and how much money they got, and this person, this new hire, making enough money to exist, the level of seniority and the pay scale. Let's say, for example, you're hiring a senior product manager. We'll go that route. Your budget for the role is $120, but as you're going through this process, you, the recruiter, maybe even the team, they wouldn't get this information from the candidate, but you and the recruiter would. As a hiring manager, this person is asking $150,000 versus the $120, which is your limit. This person has the skills, like they hitting everything on the head, and they're actually able to show you and the team throughout the process that like they might be worth this 150. how do you navigate this? In the later modules, probably the last one, we'll go over things like negotiations and how to draft up offers and communicating the offers and things like that. What's really important is how the job spec is written. So you want to make sure that the level is highlighted, first of all, and it should be agreed upon with your team. I think having a conversation with your team is extremely important to make sure that, one, they know you're hiring, right? Is, again, are we replacing someone? Are we looking to add a certain level of experience? Are we looking to add, maybe this person's going to be more of a mentor, but that person's new, right? That's like, if you left as a manager, your team got to get accustomed to whoever's going to be running the show if it's not one of them getting promoted. So there's a lot of little things that go into that. But I personally think having a conversation with your team is really important to understand, not just more or less how they would feel about it in a way, but to make sure you have a full grasp of what they are or are not capable of within their own skills, and how they can or cannot cater to this new person that you're going to bring in, whether they're a contractor or a full-time employee, it doesn't matter. Have that conversation. You want to declare what the hard skills are, what the nice to have skills are, and identify qualifiers and disqualifiers. Typically, you want a template for this. There's what I and many of us call a search kickoff template, and this is where you're listing out, you're just exploring, you're creating like a Dungeons and Dragons play sheet, right? Like background, you want story, you want to know the who, what, when, where, why, and how, both sides, both like the candidate and what they're offering and what you and your team and organization is offering. So you're kind of mapping this out to figure out what you want this to look like. And then you're eventually working with a recruiter or whoever in HR or your hiring team to refine those things, especially when it comes to defining the responsibilities and location and working requirements. This is where having, even as a manager, while you're not largely responsible for this, you should be a little bit more involved in this and have some knowledge. The labor laws in this country have changed so much in the last, I'll call it decade, right? By 2027, there's going to be 15 states that have salary transparency laws. If you are hiring remotely in any of those states or in general, you should know where some of those, you should know what some of those states are, because they are all slightly different, but at its core, those numbers that you're offering to a new hire need to be listed somewhere in some fashion. If it doesn't need to be listed, then it needs to be spoken upon in the interview process by either the recruiter or yourself. You want to make sure you're aware of what and how to ask for someone's authorization to work in the US. You can't just be like, are you a citizen or not? That is actually the incorrect way to ask that question. And this is typically asked in the application, but sometimes recruiters will re-ask the question, especially if they're a candidate that was sourced versus someone who applied directly through, the website or LinkedIn or another job board. But having awareness of, anything that it could also bite you in the ass, right? Your discriminatory laws, Title VII, which is, gender, race, religion. Then you have things like the ADA, which is the Disabilities Act. You have the ADEA, which is the ageism and employment. You want to make sure that you have some familiarity with those things. And even if you're not like super solid, which like technically is not your job, but like technically it is, ask, look it up, be a grown-up. Those are the things I want to make sure you have really good context of, so you can do some of this exploratory work on your own. One of the most important things you want to have in your job description is a general context of the role and the company, because this gives the candidate two things. One, an overview of who you are and what you're trying to do. You want to give them autonomy, right? If they were to read anything past this and look at some of the requirements and nice to haves, maybe they'll circle back to the beginning of who you are and what you are and be like, maybe this ain't for me. And now you're saving two sides time. The one side is you're saving them time. They can go into the next job description and with another company, right? They don't have to read any further. The other side is it saves you time. You, as a hiring manager and your recruiting team, your hiring team, you're not bringing someone through an entire process, and you're not eliminating this risk, by the way. Just want to make that clear. You're trying to reduce it as much as possible. You and your team, whoever's involved in your hiring process, now doesn't have to drag a candidate through something who maybe didn't read the whole job description fully, right? Or someone who is applying just to apply, which you will always have that. And you're looking at their resume and you could just be like, I'm not, this ain't who we looking for, and just slide past them and go to the next candidate as you're reviewing them. So it's really important that those things are really, really clear at the beginning of your job description, the company, what they do, maybe a little bit of how they do it. You don't need to write a dissertation, but you should have something. If that role is remote, but you're only hiring in certain states, list those states. That also saves a candidate a lot of time. Make sure that, again, if any of those states on that list, which I think you should just have the salary posted anyway, if any of those states that you currently employ people in have salary transparency laws, just make sure it's there anyway. Again, your key responsibilities doesn't need to be 400 things. And this isn't necessarily the bullet point section yet, but just like the overview, like, hey, this company does these few things and this is who we cater to, and then here's like 4 or 5 core things that like the team does every day, and how they contribute to this success. And that can be kind of a mix of like, you know, who does things directly on the team, and then bring in some of the bullet points that talk about how maybe your stakeholders engage in that. So mix those things up, make it sound interesting, even if the thing that you do or think you do is boring. That's not for you to judge. The candidate's trying to figure out if they want to be a part of this or not. So write it for them. Your must-to-haves and nice-to-haves is really where a lot of people get stuck. And especially in the middle of the interview process for this new person, because one thing we tend to do, and I'm glad I'm hearing this phrase less, but I know it's said a lot still behind the scenes, there's no such thing as a fucking unicorn. Stop looking for that. So ideally, between your must-haves, which are the things that this person should bring to the table for this role, and the nice to haves, which is like, hey, you might have like a little bit of experience in this, but it's not gonna break anything if it's like kind of there or not there at all. Between those two sections of the job description, what you need to come to the table with for sure to make sure we get work done that needs to get done and is valuable. And the nice to haves, which is like, hey, you got this extra kind of fluff that we could maybe fuck with and use to, you know, for the team's success and the company's success. Aim for like finding somebody who meets 70 to 80% of that criteria. Looking for someone who hits 100% of things is wildly stressful. You just adding gray hairs. That just look at me, right? 70 to 80% of the requirements met between those two sections is honestly good enough. As I say that, I also want to highlight something very specific here. Before you open a role, and especially if you've gotten to kind of a sticking point in the interview process, maybe you're in the debriefs with your hiring team and no one can really agree on a certain number of people, or, you know, certain criteria is not being met as much as everyone thinks they would. And this is where interview training can be really helpful too. That's a whole different project. If you or your team aren't really ready to cater to a new person, whether they're short-term contract or like a full-time employee, you can do a number of things, obviously. Adjusting the role, adjusting your target candidate pool, especially if you're doing some heavy sourcing. If you're getting stuck in all of these things, maybe there's some adjustments that need to be made in how you're interviewing, how the job description is written, the level of intensity of what you're looking for, or maybe not having that role open altogether, right? If your team, and more importantly yourself, aren't ready to take on a new person in any capacity, you're just creating chaos for yourself. Close that role until you're ready. Or you know, if it's something that is dire and you're like, this has to get done regardless of the capabilities of me and my crew right now, this is where you look into a contractor, and this is where maybe the rest of your hiring team is a little less involved, but it's still you and a recruiter and like HR person. And if you're kind of middle management, you're like VP or C-level person, right? But you want to be as ready as possible before you consider putting something out there that is very important to someone's livelihood, to the general public. That's kind of my roundup of all the things that I think should be the beginning of your process as a hiring manager. The closing of your job posting, HR will usually take care of this, right? Like they have it kind of preset. But what you want to make sure is highlighted is the perks and benefits. Yes, those things are different. This again adds a layer of autonomy for the candidate to let them decide for themselves if they want to engage with you or not in the first place. And that's not, again, to say like your perks or benefits are better or not as good as someone else's. But if they make it into the interview process, they're going to have deeper questions about that stuff. So if you don't have the answer, then maybe the recruiter or someone else within HR has that answer. I like to suggest that there is a baseline, like kind of total compensation pamphlet, if you will, to send to candidates who maybe make it to the second round. We'll talk about structuring in the next video of your interview process and how I have the process that I found the most successful. You want to have all those things at the end of your job description. And again, HR or recruiter will help you with that. But again, making sure that, the core things that a candidate needs to see is available. And before you even publish that job description, making sure that anything that you or your team needs to balance out, any needs, anything of the sort, are sorted out before you approach, obviously finance to make sure you have clearance for a budget for the role, approaching a recruiter, wasting their time when you're not really ready for their support yet, or anything there that gets you set up for success to bring the best person in possible. All the autonomy and having the general knowledge of the do's and don'ts is a great way to start this process. The next video will again be about the actual interviewing itself, creating a panel, matrices, debriefing, all of that stuff. So look out for that one in maybe a couple days.